It started with one statement. A single sentence that turned the political space upside down. Nyesom Wike, bold, loud, and unfiltered, had said, Peter Obi visiting internally displaced persons won't make him president. Those words echoed across Nigeria like thunder in a silent night. They hit hard. They cut deep. To some, it was just another political comment. But to millions of Nigerians who believed in hope, it felt personal. Because to them, Peter Obi's visits to the displaced weren't about politics. They were about humanity. About compassion. About a leader showing love where others only showed speeches. So when Wike made that statement, it sparked something powerful. A fire. A wave of emotions that could not be contained. The Obidient Movement, strong, awake, and unshaken, rose in response. They didn't use insults. They used truth. They used facts. And their voice was loud. They said, "We put it to you, sir. Nigerians are wiser now. We now know who truly stands for the people and who stands for self." That statement became the heartbeat of a new conversation. Because for years, Nigerians had been deceived by empty words and false promises. But this time, they saw through the game. They remembered. They remembered how Peter Obi, long before any presidential ambition, would quietly visit hospitals and orphanages. No cameras. No microphones. Just presence and compassion. He would sit with the displaced. Listen to their pain. Share their tears. And promise nothing except that he cared. He didn't need to be president to show leadership. He simply lived it. And the Obidient Movement reminded everyone of that. They said, before politics, Peter Obi was already practicing what many only preach. They reminded Wike that it was the same Peter Obi who stood by the people of Rivers State when floods destroyed homes. The same man who visited victims of violence in the north when it wasn't even politically popular to do so. The same man who gave from his pocket when the cameras were not rolling. Those memories flooded social media again, videos, photos, testimonies. And as they spread, something shifted. People began to question Wike's motive. Why attack kindness? Why mock compassion? Why throw stones at a man showing care for the suffering? The Obedients had an answer. They said, because good hearts expose selfish ones. Their response wasn't about defending Peter Obi's name. It was about defending the value of decency in leadership. Because in a country drowning in corruption, insincerity, and greed, kindness has become a threat. And Peter Obi represented that threat to the old order. That is why his simple visit to the displaced became a storm. It wasn't just about where he went. It was about what he stood for. When the Obidient spoke, their words carried more than emotion, they carried memory. They recalled how Peter Obi once said, "You don't have to wait to be in power to do what is right." And those words were now being proven again and again. The people listened. Some were silent, reflecting. Some were angry, awakened. And others, the undecided, began to shift their minds slowly. Because deep down, they knew, when you mock good, you expose your own emptiness. The backlash on Wike's statement grew louder each hour. Every tweet. Every post. Every clip of Obi comforting a displaced child or wiping a tear went viral. It became clear, this was not just politics anymore. This was a battle of values. Wike represented the loud, brash style of politics, power without humility. Obi represented something quieter, power with empathy. And Nigerians, tired of noise and deception, began to choose their side. One tweet captured the mood of millions. It read, "Wike can build bridges, but Obi builds trust." And that is the bridge Nigeria truly needs. The Obidient Movement rallied behind that message. They turned the criticism into strength. They turned the mockery into motivation. They said, "Sir, Nigerians now understand the game. We know the difference between those who serve themselves and those who serve others. And we will never forget who stood for the people when no one else did." That tone, calm but firm, sent a message louder than any rally. Because the truth is, Nigerians are not the same people they used to be. They are watching. They are listening. They are thinking. And they are no longer afraid to speak. The Obidient Movement made it clear, Peter Obi didn't become kind because of politics. He became political because of kindness. Those words hit the heart of the nation. Because it summed up everything. In a time when compassion is rare and sincerity is mocked, Peter Obi reminded Nigerians that leadership is not about title, it's about heart. And that truth, once spoken, cannot be unsaid. The comment that was meant to insult him ended up exposing the very soul of Nigerian politics. And at that moment, across living rooms, offices, and streets, one realization spread quietly: Nigerians are no longer blind followers. They are thinkers. They are witnesses. And they now know better. The movement had spoken. And the message was clear: you can attack the man, but you cannot kill the idea. As the debate between Wike and the Obedients echoed across the country, something darker was happening in silence. While the nation argued over words, whispers began to rise in the barracks. It started small, quiet talks in corners, hushed tones after parade, eyes filled with disappointment. Something was wrong within the military. Then, the news broke. Nigeria's defense intelligence had detained a Brigadier-General and several other senior officers. The accusation was heavy, a plot to overthrow the government. The country froze. It felt unbelievable. But for those inside the system, it wasn't surprising at all. Behind the grand titles and shiny uniforms, many soldiers were hurting. Their grievances ran deep. Their loyalty was being tested by frustration, neglect, and silence from the very people they had sworn to protect. For years, many of them had watched politicians grow richer while their own lives stood still. They had watched promotions come and go, often decided not by merit, but by connections. They had written exams again and again, failing, not because they were unqualified, but because the system had already chosen its favorites. And so, resentment built up quietly. They felt trapped in a cycle of career stagnation. The promise of progress had become an illusion. And in their silence, anger grew. One intelligence report later revealed that the detained officers had been complaining bitterly about repeated failures in promotion examinations, failures they believed were politically influenced. Some even called it humiliation in uniform. Their frustration wasn't only about money or rank. It was about respect. It was about dignity. It was about a sense of purpose they felt had been stolen. That was how the dangerous idea began, the idea of taking back the country from what they described as selfish politicians. It was reckless. It was desperate. But in their minds, it was the only way to be heard. As the investigation deepened, defense intelligence confirmed that several senior officers were being questioned, not just about words, but about meetings, coded messages, and suspicious movements between certain bases. The government acted fast. Phones were seized. Barracks were quietly searched. And for the first time in years, the word coup returned to the national conversation. But this wasn't the old-fashioned kind of coup with tanks on the streets. It was a modern whisper, born from frustration, carried by broken trust. The revelation shocked the public. But it also forced Nigerians to ask a deeper question: what drives men in uniform to turn against the system they serve? The Obidient Movement didn't stay silent either. They issued a statement, calm but firm. They said, when the people, both civilians and soldiers, lose faith in leadership, the nation begins to shake. They reminded everyone that this was what happens when justice is ignored and corruption becomes the norm. Because a country cannot expect peace when fairness is missing. The detained Brigadier-General became the face of a silent rebellion that no one wanted to acknowledge. A rebellion not fueled by bullets, but by disappointment. And as news outlets tried to spin the story, Nigerians saw the pattern clearly: ordinary people were breaking under the weight of failed promises, whether in uniform or not. In the streets, conversations changed tone. If soldiers, the most disciplined arm of the nation, had reached this level of frustration, what hope was left for ordinary citizens? Analysts warned that this was not just a military matter. It was a reflection of something larger, a system losing the confidence of its own protectors. The government's reaction was swift and defensive. Officials dismissed the coup claims as an isolated incident. But those who listened closely knew better. Behind every isolated incident in Nigeria, there is usually a deeper wound, ignored for too long. One journalist said it perfectly: this is what happens when leaders forget that even loyalty has limits. And in those few days, tension returned to the air. The same fear that once haunted the nation decades ago. Roadblocks appeared in some areas. Intelligence patrols doubled. Everyone was watching, waiting, and whispering. The story faded from headlines after a while, as most things do. But the questions remained. Because the truth is, this wasn't just about soldiers plotting a coup. It was about a broken system that keeps producing anger instead of hope. And as the dust settled, one quiet voice from the Obidient Movement summed it all up: you can silence the soldiers. You can arrest the officers. But you can't detain frustration. Not when a nation is hungry, jobless, and tired of lies. That voice echoed what millions felt, that unless something changes at the heart of leadership, the cracks in Nigeria's foundation will only grow wider. And once again, it proved what Peter Obi and his supporters had been saying all along: when leaders care only for themselves, the people, even the loyal ones, will eventually rise. In the middle of chaos, one thing became clear: Nigeria was standing at a crossroads again. The people were angry. The soldiers were frustrated. And the politicians were pretending not to hear. But out of all the noise, one movement remained steady, calm, focused, unbroken. The Obidient Movement. They had been mocked, attacked, and underestimated. Yet, they kept going. Because their fight was never about one man, it was about one message. The message that leadership should serve, not rule. When the news of the alleged coup hit the air, they didn't celebrate it. They didn't defend it. Instead, they asked the right question: what has Nigeria become when those who protect her now feel the need to rise against her leaders? It wasn't support for rebellion, it was a cry for reflection. Because when frustration spreads from the streets into the barracks, it means something has gone terribly wrong. The Obidient Movement saw it as another sign that the system is failing from the top down. They said, this is what happens when selfishness becomes leadership and leadership forgets humanity. They spoke softly but powerfully. Because their message was never about chaos, it was about conscience. They reminded Nigerians that while some were fighting for positions, Peter Obi was fighting for principles. That while others were obsessed with power, he was consistent about purpose. They pointed back to Wike's statement, the same one that started it all, and said, this is what happens when leaders mock compassion. You lose connection with the people. And they were right. Because the more Nigerians looked around, the clearer it became: the country was bleeding from neglect. The people were losing trust not only in politicians but in the system itself. Prices were rising, jobs were disappearing, insecurity was spreading, and justice felt like a luxury only a few could afford. In moments like this, the Obedients didn't shout. They reasoned. They reminded everyone that Nigeria cannot continue to build power on pain. They said, true power is not measured by how many people you can silence, but by how many lives you can lift. That line spread across social media like wildfire. It was shared, reposted, repeated, because it spoke to everyone. From the soldier waiting for promotion, to the market woman struggling to feed her family. It became clear that the movement had grown far beyond politics. It had become a mirror, reflecting what Nigerians truly wanted: honesty, compassion, and justice. And even as the government tried to downplay the coup reports, the Obedients refused to lose focus. They said, we are not calling for war. We are calling for wisdom. Because when a nation keeps ignoring its people, peace becomes fragile. Their calmness began to inspire others. Civic groups started speaking up. Students began organizing again. Even those who once doubted Peter Obi started admitting one thing: his message was consistent. They recalled how he visited the displaced, the poor, and the forgotten long before politics gave him a stage. And they realized, that is what true leadership looks like. In the end, one truth remained: you can arrest a soldier, but you cannot arrest an idea. You can silence a voice, but you cannot silence conviction. The Obidient Movement proved that politics can be different, that leadership can still have a heart. And in the middle of the noise, one phrase kept repeating online and offline alike: power will come and go, but the truth will remain. Because long after the headlines fade, people will still remember who stood with them when times were hard. They will remember the leader who didn't wait for an election to show empathy. They will remember the movement that refused to be broken. As one supporter wrote, Peter Obi may not hold power today, but he holds something greater: the trust of a nation that has woken up. And maybe, just maybe, that is the beginning of something new. A quiet revolution, not with guns, but with minds. Not with violence, but with values. A revolution built on truth, compassion, and courage. Because when people finally know better, they begin to demand better. And that is how a nation truly begins to change.